Yuli Wang is a new artist with us. As you know, in our Common Ground community, when we deal with an ethnic culture, we try to get practitioners of that culture to teach with us so that we have as much verity and truth, as much background historically, culturally, familially as possible. So we have located Julie. She is an excellent Chinese calligrapher. She works not only in calligraphy, but in the language of Chinese dialects. So she is a practitioner of all things Chinese, and I'm very sorry she can't be with us tonight. Check your search for Common Ground. I believe she's a speaker in Common Ground later in the week. Let's meet Julie virtually. Go to slide 2, please. There's Yuli. She's working on specialized paper, which was one of the things I'd hoped in our panel discussion at the end we could talk, because the difference between the papers that Yuli uses and the papers that Sue uses are very different. And the definition of ink, you see Yuli holding a beautiful Chinese brush, and she's using specialized ink. The definition of ink in Yuli's work is very different than ink used in the work that Sue does. Here's a picture of her family. And in the forefront, you see some examples of a practice page of Yuli's calligraphy with some of her students. Notice the position of her hand as she holds the brush. You'll also notice that at the ferrule, where the bristles meet the handle of the brush is much thicker and it goes to a point. So as Yuli adds pressure on the brush, the line becomes thicker. One of the beautiful things about calligraphy using these Chinese brushes is with the same brush, you can get a line as thin as a hair. And with more pressure, you can get a line as thick as the bristles on the brush. She's not holding her breath. All right, here's an example of her classroom where she's teaching calligraphy. She teaches at college, but she teaches in workshops, and she's a guest at many institutions as an instructor of Chinese culture and Chinese calligraphy. Chinese calligraphy is pictographic. These symbols tell a story, much like Egyptian hieroglyphics. There are several pictographic languages rather than languages based on an alphabet as ours is. Here's a painting that she has done. Many of these paintings include a minimal amount of color, and often the story is told below the image. Sometimes there's a seal. There could be more than one seal, depending on the reputation of the artist, the era in which the painting was done. So Yuli, as a practitioner of Chinese calligraphy, probably has her own signature seal. Cherry blossoms are a favorite theme, as are birds, and you'll notice the beautiful iris.
That's beautiful. What is that?
I don't know.
It looks like a milkweed pod or something.
I don't think it's a lotus. It's got some kind of stem, but it looks like it's been done on toned paper. Many of these are handmade.
That's gorgeous.
Gorgeous. And you can see why Van Gogh was so inspired by these Chinese painters. His garden paintings, especially his cherry blossoms, are very reminiscent of what he studied in the Chinese paintings that were coming into Europe at that time. It looks like she's working on silk here.
Wow.
With similar techniques. I believe this is a fan. So she's probably using dyes along with the inks.
Beautiful. Wow.
Look here at it is as it's progressing.
That is gorgeous.
Often they do mountains. If you've been in China, you know that sometimes the earth just gets really high.
That's gorgeous.
Close up. Often the screens are stretched silk. Sometimes they're paper, and a lot of times they're louvered so that one screen can pass in front of another for ventilation, and they're somewhat translucent so you can see through them.
Wow, look at
So
that.
these let in light, but they give you some privacy. You can see the outdoors through the screen.
Gorgeous.
And here's the finished piece of that one.
Beautiful.
These are artworks. They're functional, of course, but they're fine artworks. So when they're not being used, they have their own stand. And that actually makes it like a piece of sculpture.
That is beautiful. Ah,
And she is beautiful.
yes, she is. My goodness, look at that. Wow. Ah, cool. You sell those at the McDaniel bookstore, huh?
I don't know whether she has, will have any items with us next. She's teaching from a distance.
Look
She's
at
not going to
that.
be with us live.
Beautiful.
Some of the works of her former students.
Beautiful.
And these are sites. She plays this ancient Chinese instrument, which I hoped she would be playing for you tonight.
That's
That's
cool.
the instrument. Thank you. I hope to have Yuli next year live. And if you're a fan of Chinese calligraphy, you couldn't study with anybody better than Yuli. Sue Bloom and I have known each other for a few decades. We've been colleagues at Western Maryland and now McDaniel College. We have traveled extensively together in many countries, several trips to Italy together, Greece and Turkey and Portugal. Sue is really fun and very good at everything she attempts. One of the things that I hope she will touch on, I hope to offer some contrasts in a panel discussion between Sue and Yuli, since Sue and I've known each other so long, and Yuli and I have never met in person. And some of those were the way paper is used so differently by these two artists, the definition of ink, and the difference in how we consider hands-on. You've just seen some examples of Yuli's very delicate touch on the brush and the paper. We consider that hands-on. Sue has a delicate touch, and her hands are on her computer, but it's more the fingers of her mind at work that intrigue me. She is the author of Digital Painting and Collage. It is the book. It's been translated into 12 languages. She teaches online, but she's back teaching virtually again and greatly in demand. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome Sue Bloom.
Well, as Linda alluded, she and I have been companions in both teaching and in travel and exploring the world and art for many, many years. And we both have a background in art education, and that led me to a variety of kinds of things. So when I went to college, I initially thought that I would do drawing and painting and printmaking and so forth. I never anticipated early on that I would go into teaching, but that's where I ended up, and it turned out that I liked it. So here are some drawings and colored pencils, watercolors, charcoal. And so I still draw all the time. It's part of my discipline as an artist.
Wow.
That banana, during a sabbatical every morning, I would set up a small still life for about 30 minutes or so and sort of get my focus in gear for the day. The claw there was left over after we'd had crabs one night, and it just was too pretty. And I did, before I cracked it open and ate it, this is a little watercolor from there. So
It's beautiful. It's amazing.
so my background is in traditional fine arts. And when my kids were small, I used to do courtroom illustration for newspaper and television because I was able to catch a likeness pretty quickly. So I have a bit of a background in that. But when I came to McDaniel, Western Maryland at that time, in order to become a professor there, I needed to finish up my terminal degree. And so I scurried around and quick was taking classes to finish off what I had started many years before. And in doing so, there was a class I wanted to take at the Maryland Institute where I got my BFA and MFA. And it was full. And so I saw what was open, and there was a photography class open. And I thought, well, I did photography as an undergrad. That might be something interesting to do. So I took it, and all of a sudden I saw possibilities within photography that I had not seen before. And that led me to explore it in a great deal of depth, including going into the very early photographic processes and so forth. But at the same time, the Macintosh computer came out in 1984. So I have both of these things sort of running simultaneously in my life. I got that first computer that, if you all remember, it was this putty colored box that was about, the screen was the size of an index card and was all black and white, and only had two programs, Mac Write and Mac Paint. And wait, I'm dating myself on this, but it was so exciting. And I remember, let's go down to this one, taking photographs, continuous tone photos, and running it through a scanner. The first scanner was called a Thunder Scan, and I still have it. I got the box and everything. It was amazing, but it took like 15 minutes to make a scan, and the pixels were the size of Mount Everest, and it was just wild stuff. But it was the first time we had photos in a computer, and that I remember the thrill of that. And so I would scan images, and instead of printing them out on paper, there was only one kind of printer then, a Mac Write printer. I printed them out on overhead transparency sheets, which essentially made large negatives for myself. And then I carried in to the wet darkroom and do this collaging well before Photoshop ever came into existence. And I have worked with the Adobe people. I've worked with them for many years, working on the next versions of Photoshop. So over the years, that led me to all sorts of experimentation and creating some things that weren't normally done in Photoshop. And then that, as I was teaching these things, I was asked to, by a well-known publisher, Focal Press, to write a book about what I was doing. And I initially told them no. I had too many things happening in my life and teaching, and had kids, and just, it didn't seem possible. But they stayed in touch, and then eventually I said yes, signed the contract. And then I thought, what the heck have I done? Because I don't know the first thing about writing a book. But I ended up doing 3 for them, and they've, as Linda said, they've done well for me, and are used as textbooks in lots of places. So I started fooling around with combining things as I had done in the wet darkroom, but doing it digitally. And it offers all sorts of possibilities that you're only limited by your imagination. So this piece that I call Grace Descends is a hymnal in the church where Christopher Columbus is buried. These are tiles in Morocco, clouds in North Carolina. You know, I put all those things together, invented a shadow and so forth to create a scenario, if you would, that for me has meaning and perhaps may be interesting to other people. Here's another example. This is the end product, but what I used was I took a piece of paper and put tea stains and coffee stains on it. And then I used these that I took at Pearl Harbor, the reflections of the oil coming up, the oil slick off of the sunken ships. I took flowers, I put all these things together, and then I used some statuary from Toledo, Spain, and before I knew it, this is what came out, bit by bit by bit. So I love combining things, giving more content, more meaning perhaps to what I'm seeing. Again, seeing more, I was saying to my students today, seeing what's in your mind's eye as opposed to what is physically in front of you, seeing the possibilities of where it might go. These are wild horses. I've gone to the south of France and the Camargue along the Mediterranean to photograph these horses several times, and then have added additional texture and so forth. There are some gypsy folks that inhabit that area and that I've become friends with, that they will get a herd of these horses and drive them out into the Mediterranean and then back at me. It's just fabulous at dawn with the spray of the water and so forth. This is part of a series that I did about the concept of Venus, idealized beauty over time. How have we represented idealized beauty? And so I have a whole series that incorporate interpretations of Venus. And this part of this was from a museum in London. Part of it is a model, part of it is a nautilus shell, and so on. Combining those things, it's a large series. And I've been doing a lot of genealogy for a number of years, and that obviously I had to carry the collage kind of thing together. So in photos that I could manage to find, and there's census in there and there's maps and so forth. But so there's no sort of limits on where you might go with this. I also have a series that I've done, well, my finger got itchy there, where I've gone to France and photographed up close the brushwork of Monet. I mean, like really close. And then I photograph water lilies over here in Frederick County at a place called Lily Ponds. And I like the idea that Monet and I both loved that kind of flower and the water and so forth, but our lifetimes could never meet. And so by using some of his brushwork overlaid in with my photographs, it was a way that sort of paying homage to him with his love of the subject matter as well. So I have a series that I've done that involve that. And speaking of Monet, this is his home in Giverny with some additional kind of textures and so forth. So I've done a lot of what I refer to as digital painting, and I use Photoshop in sort of unconventional ways. And again, that's what sort of led me into these books. This is all done in Photoshop. A couple of pairs that I photographed, but it looks like it's impasto, like thick oil paint. Linda, you were saying about ink and paper and so forth. The ink that I'm using is a digital ink, and I do all sorts of different substrates that I put it on. Some of like my Hahnemühle paper is from one of the finest mills in Germany that goes back to the 1500s. Canson paper I use comes from France, another really old mill. Fabriano out of Italy. So I have to marry the right paper and its characteristics with the image that I'm going to be making. There are some that I put on very fine rice paper that I've treated with inkjet coating so it will absorb the ink. So the ink is quite different than Yuli is using, but it still is the basis of mark making. Whether you're working with a brush or some other kind of instrument. So I'm teaching a class right now on using our iPhones, which become incredibly popular, especially during COVID. And, 90% of photography now is being done on phones. I mean, that's just staggering to me. And there are people that have never taken photographs on anything but a phone at this point, lots of them. So I am sort of eclectic in my taste. You can see this is a bull riding thing that I go to. In fact, I'm going this Saturday. There are some bull riders not too far from here. So great action and can be wonderful photography. This one is in January hog butchering here in Carroll County. And I like to do these in black and white. The nature of it is, I think, enhanced by that, but something that's traditionally been done on this same farm by this same family for over 200 years. They use some of the same implements. They use the same smokehouse. I just felt somebody needed to record this because most folks, go to Safeway or Giant and get their meat wrapped up in cellophane. So this is a way of documenting it. This is a little place that I use as a harbor when I'm in Maine. I teach up there in the summertime. I'll be going up there in August. Be teaching a class that involves iPhone in the gardens of Maine. This is just such a sweet little place that almost, I gave it a rendition that for me was sort of like Currier and Ives. In that same little town is this little lobsterman's cottage that I've been photographing for years. And one time, fairly recently, as I go to photograph this every year that I'm up there, I heard music coming from the cottage, and it was Johnny Cash. And I thought, oh my goodness, what's this? And I walked around the corner and met the lobsterman. He was finally home once. And he said, well, come on in. And I told him I've been photographing his little cottage for years. So photography can often open doors. You meet people. Everybody's got a story. He certainly had a story. Coming up, if anybody likes action in the sense of this, I think reenactments are falling a little bit out of vogue right now. But this coming week is the 160th anniversary of Gettysburg, and there'll be lots to do up on the Gettysburg battlefield. This is down in Cedar Creek. But phones can do wonderful portraits as well, and they're always interesting characters at this. And Linda, you've been with me when I've been in Florence for the Epiphany Parade, which is just luscious. These people look like they're Medicis that just stepped off the wall of the paintings at the Uffizi, which is just back the corner there. And there's incredible photography there. At that time, Epiphany, January the 6th is a big, big deal in Florence. So I also, with the phone, teach how to do portraits. And so these are grandkids of mine, but trying to portray them and catch them when they're not being too goofy, So this one's a little more of a different kind of portrait. This is my mom's hand shortly before she died. So I won't be photographing her anymore, but I have this as a remembrance. And we often use photographs to remember people by. And I think that, when people have a house fire or a hurricane or a tornado, the thing that they bemoan the most is the loss of their photographs that documents their lives and that they were there and they lived through this and so forth. So here are some more. I like, as she alluded, I like to travel. So much to see. This is that Camargue area in the south of France with the wild white horses. They have thatched houses. They're very interesting. They still have some of the old gypsy wagons too in that area. I was telling my class today to get out early to try to do dawn or to do dusk. The light is long and it is a good time to get outside. And you got these phones now. My goodness, it's in your pocket. It's not like you have to carry a lot of heavy gear. So, Linda, did you go to Sicily with me? You're muted.
Yeah, I think I did 3 trips with you to Italy.
But you went to Sicily on the Sicily one time?
Patty and I went to Sicily. That's where our grandparents were from.
Gotcha. It's a fabulous place. Just
Yeah.
fabulous. So again, documenting what you see is part of your life, how you interpret it. What is it that you see? You know, look at those beautiful paintings we just saw with the calligraphy, with the cherry blossoms, the interpretation of that, how really elegant and beautiful that is. It's different, but things should be different. We should all, our eyes are not the same, our minds are not the same. We are making our own kind of interpretations of what we see. These were some churches that I went into that were abandoned in the Dordogne region of France, and hadn't been used as places of worship for several centuries. But the gal that I was staying with, she knows everybody, and she said, well, go over to such and such a porch, lift up the flower pot on the porch, underneath is the key, and it'll get you into the church. And so I was able to visit some of these churches that were just incredible. The fresco on the wall is the deadly sins in that church. I did these at the asylum where Van Gogh stayed. Statue of him there, and this is looking out his room. He looked out on the garden below, the iris and lilies and so forth. So, Lynn, are you still there? Did we lose Lynn?
I am here, and I have that magnificent photo painting on my wall, and I love it every day. It's so gorgeous.
One on the left, yeah.
Yes, absolutely gorgeous.
And this is the village where Van Gogh died. And I would walk up the hill and photograph where he walked all the time. And I was there at the time of year that he died with the poppies in bloom. And we believe that his last painting had birds, although it's not been rediscovered. We don't know what happened to it. But I took the liberty of adding the birds. The birds didn't cooperate with me that day. But in photography, you can add all sorts of stuff. This is Pompeii. And one of the things about using the iPhone, there are all these apps that can do marvelous things. And this was done with an app that no longer exists. So sometimes I'll fall in love with something and then it gets discontinued. And this was discontinued, unfortunately. But these were done with that particular app, which I
What
love.
is that one on the left? What is that?
That's San Marino, little independent nation on the eastern coast of Italy, overlooking the Adriatic.
Gorgeous.
So these are a little bit closer to home.
Beautiful.
But beauty is everywhere. You can find beauty in your backyard. I mean, there are places that we'll travel to because we want to go and see that particular kind of beauty or scene that we've seen. But I'm convinced that you can find beauty anywhere. You can find beauty in the way the light comes in and strafes your toothbrush in the morning, if your eyes are open and looking. This one I took from a moving car. So it's, I think photography is very personal for every person. Each person's going to interpret things in different ways. But that's sort of the joy of it. There's this discovery And then you as the artist, what can you do to make that image be all that it could be? So here, a sampling here. I tried to put together a sampling of things that I've done recently. The one on the right, that wet road, you know, I was going out to a greenhouse. It was early in the morning, and it had rained. And there, in the original photo, there are lots of electrical lines and so forth, but digitally I could remove them and add some mood and texture to the sky and turn it into something that was more what I saw in my mind's eye when I had the urge to take that photo. But that's like in your backyard. That's on the way over to Kemar. So I will often drive up and down the roads, finding obscure little roads and just seeing what I can capture, perhaps. My husband drives and I time to pull over. I call these drive-by shootings that I do. And you'd be surprised when you're looking what really is out there that we just go past and we don't pay attention to normally. And that's sort of what has happened here. That's me taking a photograph with all the big camera gear a couple of years ago. And my friend who was along, she kept saying, Sue, look behind you. But I was concentrating on what I was doing and wasn't paying attention to her. And of course, the photo was behind me. As I often tell my students, turn around, sometimes the photo is behind you. In this case, that's really the teacher should have listened to what she preached. Yeah. So I find that I like quotes, you know, and you may like this one or not, but I think it helps tell sort of what happens with an artist when you have these ideas and it's in your head, but it has to go through your hands, your eyes, and your heart. And you saw Yuli doing the very delicate brushwork, you know, how that went from her head through her body down to and expressed itself in that line, you know. And so whatever path you take in form of art, whether it's sculpture, whether you're taking a class at Common Ground in blacksmithing, whatever it might be, watercolor, those are just tools that you learn to use and start to pick up the techniques and what that tool is good at doing. But it's really about making the mark. And the mark comes initially from your head and your heart, I think. And then we learn to express it in a variety of ways. And I've been lucky enough to try lots of different mediums over my life, and hopefully I'll get to do a few more. I love the idea of still learning. I don't think I'm done learning. I think I learn something new every day, and I always learn from my students. As everybody has a story to tell.
Sue, that's so beautiful. Your work is truly astounding. You are an amazing artist, and it's such a joy to see it. You are truly amazing.
Thank you, Sue.
You were so
We pride ourselves at Common Ground having small classes with masters in their art form, and Sue is certainly a master of her art form.
She is indeed. Fabulous.
You know, honestly, I mean, that's lovely for you to say, but all I've ever really done is followed my nose.
Yeah.
You know, be curious and wonder what if, and follow.
No, Sue, I'm sorry. You are an artist. You are a total artist. It's amazing.
It's my favorite question, Sue. What if? And I think for those of us who work in a series, that we can't ignore that question. Because as you're working on a piece, or you're experimenting with something, or an accident happens and you go, what if? I'm teaching reticulation next week. And that began when those artists making those famous Russian eggs crinkled some metal.
Mm.
And somebody said, what if, and named it, claimed it as a technique. And all of a sudden, it wasn't just in Russia, it was in Greece. It was in France. Everybody was claiming it as a technique, not an accident. And one of my favorite techniques, and one of my favorite questions, what if? Tonight, in about a half an hour, tune into the keynote address by Ryan Coons. He is talking about appropriation of Native American lands and also Maryland State Arts Council. So instead of a concert tonight, we have Ryan as a keynote address. Every night at the same time, 8 o'clock, there will be a performance. So please join us for these evening activities. Thank you very much.